Sylvester Stallone grabbed Jason Statham by the collar on set and shoved him backward into a stack of equipment, their faces inches apart as the entire crew froze in stunned silence. Statham didn't flinch. He planted his feet, locked eyes with the man who built Rocky, and told him he wasn't backing down, not today, not ever. What happened in the next 48 hours would become Hollywood legend, a story whispered about for decades. What happened in the next 72 hours would become Hollywood legend, a story whispered about for decades, a story about two action stars, two massive egos, one film set that couldn't hold them both, and a confrontation so raw, so real, that the studio nearly buried the entire project to keep it quiet. But I'm going to tell you the whole thing, every word, every shove, every moment where it almost went sideways permanently. Believe me, let's set the stage fast. The year is 2013, the production is Expendables 3, they're shooting in Bulgaria, outside Sofia, in a massive converted warehouse that doubles as their base of operations set. It's 90 degrees inside because the lighting rigs turn the place into an oven. The cast reads like a who's who of guys who've broken bones on camera for a living. Jet Li, Dolph Lundgren, Harrison Ford, Wesley Snipes, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Terry Crews, Randy Couture. And at the center of all of it, Sylvester Stallone, the man who created this franchise, who wrote the script, who handpicked every single name, and who considered every frame of this movie his personal property. Then there was Jason Statham. See, Statham had been Stallone's number 2 since the first Expendables. He was the younger guy, the faster guy, the one audiences were starting to prefer in the action sequences. He could do things on camera that Stallone physically couldn't do anymore. High kicks, diving rolls, full-speed fights without doubles. And Statham knew it. He didn't brag about it. He didn't need to. His body did the talking every time the cameras rolled. Now here's what nobody tells you. The friction between these two didn't start on Expendables 3. It started on Expendables 2. During the production of the second film, Stallone had noticed something that bothered him. In test screenings, audiences were reacting bigger to Statham's fight scenes than to his own. Stallone's sequences got respect. Statham's got cheers. There's a difference. Respect is what you give the old champion when he walks to the ring. Cheers are what you give the guy you actually want to watch fight. Stallone didn't say anything at the time. He filed it away. He's a chess player, always has been. He built Rocky from nothing, wrote it in 3 days, refused to sell the script unless he starred in it, and turned that stubbornness into a billion-dollar franchise. You don't do that without being strategic. You don't do that without knowing exactly where you stand in the room at all times. So when Expendables 3 went into pre-production, Stallone made a decision. He restructured the script. He brought in a batch of younger actors, Kellen Lutz, Glenn Powell, Ronda Rousey, Victor Ortiz. The plot had Stallone's character, Barney Ross, literally benching the old team and recruiting new blood. On paper, it was a story choice. In reality, get this, it was a power move. Stallone was diluting Statham's screen time. He was surrounding himself with younger faces who wouldn't challenge him because they were too new, too grateful, too hungry for the exposure to push back on anything. Statham saw it immediately. He got the revised script in London, flipped through it in his kitchen, and called his agent within the hour. The conversation was short. He wanted to know why his character, Lee Christmas, had been reduced to what amounted to a glorified cameo in the first 2 acts. His agent told him the truth. Stallone controls this. Stallone writes it. Stallone decides. Statham flew to Sofia 3 weeks before shooting started. He wasn't scheduled to arrive for another 10 days. He showed up early because he wanted to have the conversation face to face. No agents, no managers, no publicists crafting careful emails. Face to face. That's how Statham operates. He grew up on the streets of Great Yarmouth, a coastal town in England where your mouth wrote checks your fists had to cash. He'd been a diver on the British national team, a black market salesman, a model, and a martial artist before he ever stepped in front of a camera. He didn't climb the ladder. He kicked it over and built his own. When he landed in Sofia, he went straight to the production office. Stallone was in a meeting with the director, Patrick Hughes, a relatively unknown Australian filmmaker who'd been given the biggest job of his career and was clearly operating under Stallone's thumb. Hughes was a good director, smart, capable. But on this set, Stallone was the real director. Everyone knew it. Hughes knew it. The crew knew it. The only person who refused to accept it was Statham. Stallone walked out of the meeting room and found Statham waiting in the hallway. Statham was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, jaw tight. He didn't say hello, he didn't shake hands. "We need to talk about the script." Stallone stopped walking. He looked at Statham for a long beat. Then he kept walking toward his trailer. Over his shoulder, he said, "We'll talk later." Statham pushed off the wall and followed him. "We'll talk now." Stallone spun around. His neck muscles corded. His eyes narrowed. He was 67 years old, but still built thick and hard, still carrying the frame of a guy who'd spent 50 years in a gym. He stepped toward Statham and lowered his voice. "I said later." Statham didn't step back. He stood exactly where he was, 2 inches shorter, 20 years younger, and completely unbothered. "I swear this happened." A PA who was in the hallway that day later told a crew member, who later told a journalist off the record, that the two men stood chest to chest for what felt like a full minute. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The PA said it was like watching two dogs lock eyes, waiting to see which one would bite first. Stallone broke it, not by backing down, by turning away and walking into his trailer. The door shut hard enough to rattle the frame. Statham went back to his hotel. That night, nothing happened. The next morning, the real war started. Stallone called a full cast meeting. Everybody was there. The veterans, the new recruits, the stunt team, the department heads. Stallone stood at the front of the room, script pages in hand, and walked through the shooting schedule for the first 2 weeks. He was thorough. He was commanding. He talked about the vision for the film, the tone, the pacing, and then he got to the action, sequences. Now here's where it gets ugly. Stallone announced that the film's centerpiece fight, the big climactic battle, would feature the young team prominently. Lutz, Powell, Rousey, Ortiz. They would get the showcase moments. The original team, Statham included, would play support. They'd be there, but they wouldn't be the focus. Stallone framed it as a passing of the torch narrative. The old guard stepping aside for the new generation. Every head in the room turned towards Statham. He was sitting in the second row, one leg crossed over the other, fingers laced behind his head. His expression didn't change, but his right thumb pressed hard into the back of his own neck, hard enough that the knuckle went white. That's the only tell Statham has. When he's angry, truly angry, he presses something, a table edge, a door frame, his own skin. The meeting ended, people filed out. Statham stayed seated. Stallone gathered his papers and started to leave. "Sly." Stallone paused at the door. "This isn't what I signed up for." Stallone didn't turn around. "It's what the movie needs. It's what you need. It's not what the movie needs." Now Stallone turned. He set his papers down on the nearest table with the kind of deliberate slowness that says, "I am choosing not to lose my temper. I created this franchise. I know what it needs." Statham uncrossed his legs and stood up. "You created it, and I helped make it work. You know that." And here's the thing, Stallone did know it. Deep down, beneath the ego and the control and the decades of being the biggest name on every call sheet he'd ever been on, Stallone knew that Statham had been essential. The chemistry between Barney Ross and Lee Christmas was the emotional spine of the first 2 films. Take that away, and you've got a parade of cameos held together by explosions. But Stallone couldn't say that. Admitting Statham's importance meant admitting his own declining position. And Sylvester Stallone has never, not once in 60 years of Hollywood warfare, admitted that he was anything less than the center of the universe. He left the room without another word. For real, though. 2 days later, shooting began. The first week was exterior stuff. Vehicles, explosions, wide shots of the team moving through Bulgarian locations dressed up to look like third-world conflict zones. Stallone and Statham didn't share any scenes that week, which was probably by design. They orbited each other on set without collision. The crew noticed the temperature. The grips talked about it during lunch. The camera operators mentioned it in their group chat. The 2 leads hadn't spoken a single word to each other off camera since that meeting room confrontation. Then came day 8. Day 8 was the first interior scene featuring both Stallone and Statham. It was a simple sequence. Barney Ross returns to the team's headquarters after recruiting the young guns. Lee Christmas is there, angry about being benched. They argue. Christmas storms out. 2 pages of dialogue. Should have taken half a day to shoot. It took 14 hours. And this is where it gets real. The first take went fine, professional. Both actors hit their marks, delivered their lines, nailed the blocking. Patrick Hughes called cut and asked for a second take with a minor adjustment to Statham's eyeline. Second take. Stallone changed one of his lines. Instead of saying, "I need guys who can keep up," which was in the script, he said, "I need guys who are hungry. You lost that a long time ago." That wasn't in the script. Statham's jaw flexed. He stayed in character, finished the scene, waited for Hughes to call cut. Then he walked over to Stallone, still on his mark, and said quietly, "Keep it on the page." Stallone shrugged. It felt right. It didn't feel right to me. This is what the world doesn't see about filmmaking. The camera captures the performance, but the real drama happens in the 3 feet between actors when the red light goes off. That's where reputations get tested. That's where the real fights happen. Take 3. Stallone changed another line. This time he added a look, a dismissive up-and-down glance at Statham's character that wasn't in the stage directions. It was small, subtle, the kind of thing that only another actor would catch. But it changed the dynamic of the scene. It made Christmas look weak. It made Ross look like he was discarding a tool he'd outgrown. You better believe Statham caught it. He stopped mid-scene, just stopped. Broke character in the middle of a take, which Jason Statham does not do. He looked directly into Stallone's eyes, not at Barney Ross's eyes, at Stallone's eyes, and said, "Are we making a movie or are we having a conversation?" The room went quiet. Hughes stood up from his monitor. He could feel it. Everyone could feel it. This wasn't about the scene anymore. This was about 2 men who'd been circling each other for 3 films, and one of them had finally decided to stop circling. Stallone took a half step towards Statham. "Yeah, we're making my movie." That's when Statham said the thing that changed everything. "Your movie stopped making money the moment you started making it about yourself. Listen to me carefully. In Hollywood, you can insult a man's face, his family, his talent, his car, but you do not tell a producer star that his ego is costing the studio money. That's not a creative disagreement. That's a business accusation. That's saying you are the problem, and everyone in this room knows it." Stallone's face went dark. Not red, dark. There's a difference. Red is anger. Dark is something older, something colder. He grabbed Statham by the front of his shirt and shoved him backward, hard. Statham's back hit the equipment rack behind him. Metal crashed. Weights bounced. A C-stand toppled over and smashed into a light panel that shattered across the concrete floor. Statham caught his balance in half a second. His hands came up, not in fists but open, palms out, the way a trained fighter stands when he's ready but not yet committed. His feet shifted into a wider base. His weight dropped. Every person in that room who knew anything about fighting recognized what they were looking at. Jason Statham, a man who holds legitimate black belts in multiple disciplines, a man who trained with the British national diving team to control every muscle in his body, was loaded up like a coiled spring. He could have hit Stallone. He had every right to. A 67-year-old man had just put hands on him in front of 40 crew members. One punch and it's over. One punch and the story becomes Stallone got dropped on his own set. One punch and Statham wins the battle but loses everything else, because Hollywood doesn't forgive the guy who hits the legend. Hollywood forgives the legend, always. Statham knew that. In that fraction of a second, with his hands up and his weight loaded and every instinct screaming at him to fire, he made the calculation. And he chose. He straightened up. He lowered his hands. He looked Stallone dead in the face and said, "You want to do this for real, we can, but not here. Trust me on this." That sentence saved the production. It saved Stallone's dignity. It might have saved Stallone's consciousness, frankly. But more importantly, it told everyone in the room exactly who the bigger man was. And it wasn't the one who'd done the shoving. Stallone stood there, breathing hard, fists still balled. Terry Crews, who'd been watching from the doorway, walked over and put one massive hand on Stallone's shoulder. Didn't say a word, just placed his hand there and applied gentle pressure. Stallone shrugged it off, turned, and walked to his trailer. The door slammed. Production shut down for the rest of the day. That night, the producers held an emergency conference call with Lionsgate executives in Los Angeles. The question on the table was simple and terrifying. Do we have a movie? Can these 2 men finish this film together? Because if they can't, we're looking at a $40 million write-off and a franchise that dies right here in Bulgaria. The studio's answer was equally simple. Fix it. We don't care how. Fix it. The job of fixing it fell to an unlikely person. Not the director, not a producer, not an agent or a manager or a studio fixer flown in from Burbank. It fell to Arnold Schwarzenegger. This is going to surprise you. Arnold had been watching the whole thing develop. He'd seen it on Expendables 2 as well. He understood the dynamic because he'd lived it. In the 80s, Stallone and Schwarzenegger had been the 2 biggest action stars on the planet, and their rivalry had been genuinely hostile. They'd competed for scripts, for box office records, for magazine covers, for the title of biggest action star alive. It nearly destroyed both of them. It took decades for them to become friends. Arnold knew what jealousy tastes like when it sits in your throat for years. He knew what it does to a man who built his entire identity on being the toughest guy in the room and then watches a younger, faster model start to take his place. So Arnold went to Stallone's trailer. He didn't knock, he just walked in. He found Stallone sitting on the small couch, still in costume, holding a bottle of water with both hands, staring at the floor. Arnold sat down across from him. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Arnold said something that, according to the one crew member who overheard it through the thin trailer walls, nobody expected. "I know what you're afraid of." Stallone looked up. His eyes were wet, not crying, but wet. The eyes of a man who's been carrying something heavy for a very long time and just felt the weight shift. "You're afraid that when you stop, nobody will remember you started." Mark my words, that sentence broke something open. Stallone set the water bottle down. He pressed both palms against his face and held them there. Arnold waited. He didn't fill the silence with more words. He just sat there, one legend giving another legend room to breathe. Stallone finally dropped his hands and said, "He's better than me. He's faster, he's younger, and every time I watch him work, I know the audience is going to follow him out the door." Arnold nodded. "So let them." "What?" "Let them follow him. You built the door. That's the part they'll remember." And there it is, the turning point, because that conversation didn't just change the rest of the production. It changed what Stallone did the next morning, which is the part of this story that truly became legendary. He rewrote the script overnight. Not the whole thing, just the third act. He put Lee Christmas back in the centerpiece. He gave Statham the film's best fight sequence. He restructured the climax so that Ross and Christmas worked together as equals, not as mentor and sidekick, not as old guard and new blood, but as two warriors who trusted each other. And then he did something that no one on that set had ever seen Sylvester Stallone do before. He apologized. Not publicly, not in front of the crew. He went to Statham's hotel room at 6 a.m, knocked on the door, and when Statham opened it, still half asleep, hair a mess, wearing a gray t-shirt and shorts, Stallone handed him the revised pages and said, "I was wrong. I was fighting the wrong guy." Statham took the pages. He looked at them. He looked at Stallone. He stepped back and opened the door wider. They sat in that hotel room for 2 hours. They went through the script page by page. They argued. They negotiated. They compromised. But the arguing was different now. It was collaborative, not competitive. It was two professionals figuring out how to make something better, not two egos trying to win. For what it's worth. When they walked onto set together that morning, the crew knew something had shifted. They couldn't put their finger on what exactly had changed, but the atmosphere had transformed. The heat was gone. The tension had dissolved into something more productive, the kind of creative friction that actually makes movies better. The scene they'd tried to shoot the day before, they nailed it in 3 takes. And this time, when Stallone delivered the line about needing guys who could keep up, he played it differently. He played it with sadness instead of superiority. He played it as a man who knows he's slowing down and hates himself for it. It was the best acting Stallone had done in years, and it happened because Statham had pushed him there. Now here's the part that gets lost in the Hollywood gossip machine. Over the remaining weeks of production, Stallone and Statham didn't become best friends. They didn't suddenly start hanging out and drinking beers and slapping each other on the back. What they became was something rarer and more valuable. They became genuine collaborators. Stallone started consulting Statham on action choreography. Statham started deferring to Stallone on story structure. Each man acknowledged what the other brought to the table, and for the first time in 3 films, they stopped trying to win the same trophy. The fight choreography for the final act was designed together. Stallone and Statham sat with the stunt coordinator for 3 full days, blocking out every punch, every kick, every gun reload, every explosion beat. Stallone focused on the dramatic moments, the pauses between the violence where the characters' faces told the story. Statham focused on the kinetic sequences, the speed, the acrobatics, the technical precision that made audiences grip their armrests. The result was the best action sequence in the entire Expendables franchise. And here's what kills me about this whole thing. Nobody talks about it. The movie itself underperformed. It got a PG-13 rating, which alienated the core audience. An unfinished cut leaked online 3 weeks before release, and millions of people watched a pirated version instead of buying tickets. Expendables 3 became the franchise's lowest-grossing entry, and in the noise of its commercial disappointment, the real story got buried. The real story was never about the box office. The real story was about a 67-year-old man who built an empire on his own stubbornness, who almost let that stubbornness destroy the thing he built, and who, at the last possible moment, found the courage to bend. But wait, I'm not done, because there's one more moment that sealed this whole thing. One moment that happened on the last day of shooting in Sofia, during the wrap party at a restaurant the production had rented out for the night. Good food, open bar, music, the usual end-of-shoot celebration where everyone pretends they liked each other for 12 weeks. Stallone stood up at the end of dinner. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand. The room settled. People expected a generic thank you speech. Stallone thanked the crew. He thanked the director. He thanked the studio. Standard stuff. Then he turned to Statham, who was sitting at a table near the back between Cruise and Lundgren. Stallone raised his glass and said, "There's a guy in this room who made me better by refusing to let me be comfortable. I didn't like it at the time. I might have put my hands on him." Scattered, nervous laughter. But he was right and I was wrong. And the movie is better because he didn't back down. Statham didn't stand up. He didn't wave. He didn't perform humility for the crowd. He just lifted his glass a few inches off the table and nodded once. That was enough. That was everything. Dolph Lundgren, sitting to Statham's left, later told an interviewer that it was the only time in 4 decades of knowing Stallone that he'd heard the man publicly admit he was wrong about anything. Dolph said he nearly choked on his steak. Cross my heart. After Expendables 3, the relationship between Stallone and Statham evolved into something neither of them probably expected. They stayed in contact. When Stallone was developing projects, he'd call Statham for input. When Statham was prepping for a role that required dramatic weight, he'd call Stallone. It was an unofficial mentorship that ran in both directions. The older man taught narrative instinct. The younger man taught physical honesty. Years later, when Expendables 4 finally materialized, the dynamic between them was completely different. Stallone stepped back from the central role and let Statham carry the franchise forward. He did it willingly. He did it without the fight. And if you watch interviews from that period, you can see it on Stallone's face. He's at peace with it. He's proud of it even. He built the door. And he let the next guy walk through it. That's the line that matters. That's the line Arnold gave him in a tiny trailer in Bulgaria on a hot night when the whole project was about to collapse. You built the door. That's what they'll remember. You might be wondering why this story never made it into the trades, why there weren't paparazzi shots and TMZ reports and leaked audio recordings. The answer is simple. Both men had too much to lose. Stallone couldn't afford to be the aging star who picked a fight with a younger man and lost. Statham couldn't afford to be the upstart who embarrassed a legend, so they kept it locked down. The crew signed agreements. The producers buried it in production reports. The studio pretended it never happened. But stories like this don't stay buried forever. They come out in bits and pieces. A stunt coordinator mentions it vaguely in a podcast. A grip tells his buddy at a bar in Burbank. A background actor writes about it on an anonymous forum. The details filter out over years, like water through a cracked dam, until eventually you can piece together the whole picture. And the picture is this. 2 men, both at critical moments in their careers, collided. One was holding on to something, the other was reaching for it. And the collision didn't destroy them, it refined them. It burned away the pretense and left something honest behind. Here's the last thing. I talk to you guys every week about legends, about fighters, about moments where history turns on a single decision. And the decision that Jason Statham made in that split second, with his hands up and his body loaded and every right in the world to throw a punch, that decision is the one I want you to remember. He chose restraint. Not because he was weak, not because he was afraid, but because he understood that winning a fight and winning the war are 2 completely different things. He could have flattened Stallone. He could have become the guy who knocked out Rocky. Instead, he became the guy who made Rocky better, and Stallone, for his part, made a decision too. Alone in his trailer, eyes wet, ego cracked, he chose to listen. He chose Arnold's advice. He chose to rewrite not just the script, but his own role in the story. He went from protagonist to architect, from the guy in the spotlight to the guy who built the stage. I was fighting the wrong guy. Those 6 words, that's the whole story. That's the legend. If this story hit you the way it hit me, go ahead and smash that subscribe button. Drop a comment. Tell me about a time you had to decide between winning the moment and winning the long game. I read every single one of those comments, and I promise you, The stories you guys share are half the reason I keep making these videos. Now let me land this thing. Expendables 3 opened to 52 million worldwide on its first weekend. Critics called it the weakest entry in the series. The piracy leak cost the studio an estimated 40 million in lost revenue. On paper, by every measurable standard, the movie was a disappointment. But here's what the numbers don't capture. They don't capture the moment when Sylvester Stallone, one of the most stubborn men in the history of entertainment, knocked on a hotel room door at 6 a.m, handed revised pages to a man he'd shoved into a steel rack 24 hours earlier, and said 5 words that cost him more than any box office loss ever could. I was wrong. They don't capture Jason Statham standing in that doorway, looking at those pages, and making the choice to open the door wider instead of slamming it shut. They don't capture Arnold Schwarzenegger, sitting in a cramped trailer, offering the kind of wisdom that only comes from a man who's fought the exact same battle and lost before he learned to win. They don't capture Dolph Lundgren almost choking on a steak. The legend isn't about a punch that was thrown. The legend is about a punch that wasn't. The legend is about what happens when 2 powerful men reach the edge and one of them has the clarity to stop, and the other has the humility to bend. That's the fight everyone missed. Not the shove. Not the chest-to-chest standoff in a hallway. Not the 14-hour shooting day that produced nothing. The fight everyone missed was the one that happened after the cameras stopped and the doors closed, and 2 men who could have destroyed each other decided to build something instead. Stallone built the door. Statham walked through it. And the rest of us got to watch.